Okay. Thank you so much for coming, and I will thank in advance our performers this evening for coming and sharing their voices with us. I've been really looking forward to this since I heard about their plans for this evening. I am going to introduce Barbara Larkham, who's going to be the host tonight, and she'll be introducing the acts. We have several groups of performers who will be performing tonight, and she will introduce them in order that they come.
So first we have a reading of an important speech by Martin Luther King, which he spoke 1 year to the day before he was assassinated at Riverside Church in New York City. As you know, Martin Luther King was very active for a number of years in the civil rights movement, quite an active leader. But toward the end of what became the end of his life, he also expanded his vision. He became very aware that consumerism and militarism were also very harmful in our society. And he started speaking out about that. And so the speech that he gave on April 4th, 1967, was what some people consider one of his most important speeches of his life, where he talked about the war in Vietnam. So we have 8 readers, and I will just list their names in order, and then they will start reading his speech. Analysis: Joe Byrne, Talia, Teresa, Aya, Jerry, Cameron, and Shakira. Oh, I should say one more thing. Some of these readers are students. Aya, Talia, and Shakira are high school junior counselors at By Peaceful Means Summer Peace Camp in East Baltimore. By Peaceful Means Camp has been going for 10 years, and it entertains, empowers, and teaches Baltimore City children about peaceful resolution. So without further ado, we'll invite you to start reading.
Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony. But we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movements and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people? They ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concerns, I am nevertheless greatly saddened. Though for such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me. They have not really known my commitment or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live.
I wish not to speak with Hanoi and the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated, as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. And so we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. And so we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village, but we realize that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
For those who ask the question, are you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement of peace, I have this for the answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and chose as our motto, to save the soul of America, we were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights of black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles they still wear. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes, the Black Bard of Harlem, who had written earlier, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam and search within myself for ways to understand and repeat in compassion, my mind goes constantly to the people of Pensacola. I speak now not to the soldiers of each side, not of the analogies of the Liberation Front, not of the junta in Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war and under curse of war of almost 3 continuous decades now. They must see American as strange liberators. The Vietnamese people proclaimed their own independence in 1947. after a combined French and Japanese occupation and before the Communist Revolution in China. They were led by Ho Chi Minh. Even though they quoted the American Declaration of Independence in their own document of freedom, we refused to recognize them. Instead, we decided to support France in its reconquest of our former colony. Our government felt then that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence, and we fell again in a deadly Western arrogance that has poised the international atmosphere for so long. With tragic decision, we rejected a revolutionary government seeking self-determination and a government that has been established not by China, for whom the Vietnamese have no great love, but by clearly indigenous forces that have included such communists. For the peasants, this new government meant real land and form, one of the most important needs in our lives.
They watch as we poison their water, as we kill 1 million acres of their crops. They must weep as the bulldozers roar through their areas, preparing to destroy the precious trees. They wander into the hospitals with at least 20 casualties from American firepower for one Viet Cong-inflicted injuries. So far, we may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They wander into the towns and see thousands of the children, homeless, without clothes, running in packs on the streets like animals. They see the children degraded by our soldiers as they beg for food. They see the children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers. What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords and as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land reform? What do they think as we test our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? Where are the roots of the independent Vietnam we claim to be building? Is it among these voiceless ones? We have destroyed their two most cherished institutions, the family and the village. We have destroyed their lands and their crops. We have corrupted their women and children and killed their men.
Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence when it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. For from his view we may indeed see the basic weaknesses of our own condition, and if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who are called the opposition. Hanoi remembers how our leaders refused to tell us the truth about the earlier North Vietnamese overtures for peace, how the president claimed that none existed when they had clearly been made. Ho Chi Minh has watched as America has spoken of peace and built up its forces, and now he has surely heard of the increasing international rumors of the American plans for an invasion of the North. He knows the bombing and shelling and mining we're doing are part of traditional pre-invasion strategy. Perhaps only his sense of humor and of irony can save him when he hears the most powerful nation of the world speaking aggression as it drops thousands of bombs on a poor, weak nation more than 8,000 miles away from its shores. At this point, I should make it clear that while I have tried in these last few minutes to give a voice to the voiceless in Vietnam and to understand the arguments of those who are called enemy, I am deeply concerned about our own troops there as anything else. Before long, they must know that their government has sent them into a struggle among Vietnamese, and the more sophisticated surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure while we create a hell for the poor.
I am convinced if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from thing-oriented societies to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs reconstructing. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say, this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say, this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's home with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of people's normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression. And out of the wounds of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Omar Khayyam is right. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on.
We still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to act. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders our doors. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged along a dark, shameful, and quarters of time reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. As that noble board of yesterday, James Russell Lowell, eloquently stated, "Once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide, in the strife of truth and falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, God's new Messiah, offering each the bloom and blight. And the choice goes by forever twixt that darkness, that light. And if we only make the right choice, we will be able to transform this pending cosmic elegy into great psalms of peace. If we will make the right choice, we will be able to transform a jangling discord of our world into a peaceful sympathy of brotherhood. If we will but make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like mighty streams."
Well, that was pretty wonderful. Your reading was wonderful. And his words were very inspiring as well. This is not on the schedule for tonight, but I'm just taking a moment of privilege, I guess, to ask if we could take maybe just 2 minutes, if any of the readers have something they would like to add in terms of how they're feeling as a result of learning something more about this speech. Would any of you like to add something? If so, you need to talk into the mic, so live streaming will cover it, but...
So I never heard this speech before. I only heard of I have a dream speech because that's all they teach you in school. But after listening to the readers read this speech, I think it's a great speech and I like it. I enjoyed reading it too.
As my fellow counselor said, in schools they don't teach us more poems about Martin Luther King. From what I read, there's more than what meets the eye. Because, in a way, Martin Luther King speaks in many ways. I Have a Dream is just one way of saying it. And in multiple speeches, he's sending signs of how we could change society and make America a better place for everyone. And I feel like it's more of a way of us more of listening. And Martin Luther King was one of those who was able to help us listen.